who is this event for? Like, what kind of founder should consider this event?
Yeah, on the founders side, I would say anybody building tech in the middle of the country is a great candidate for it. And I would put a slight asterisk to say that intends to raise capital at some point. They
Okay.
definitely don't need to be raising capital right now. But if they've raised before, or they're thinking about building their network, anywhere along the spectrum, they would be a good group to have in. Traditionally, we said kind of uh, venture backed or venture ready companies, but you also don't have to be raising venture capital per se. We will have some, royalty based or debt focused funds as well, if
Okay.
that's a fit for your company.
And we're back. Another episode of the Startup Puzzle. This is your host, Matt Watson. Excited to be joined today with the guy with all the money. Ian Kerr works at a partner of Flyover Capital, who's one of the original VC funds here in Kansas City, or one of the earliest funds here in Flyover Capital in the Kansas City area. Dan, welcome to the show, man.
Great to be here, Matt. Good to see you.
Excited to talk to you today about MidxMidwest, which is a event that's upcoming here, and love to hear more from you about the state of the union, about how VC and funding and all these things have changed in 2024. Hear all the rumors and all the things, but love to hear directly from you and what you're seeing in the market. Before we get started, I do want to remind everybody today's episode is brought to you by Fullscale, which is my company. If you're looking to hire software developers, you can check us out at fullscale.io. We can help you hire amazing senior level developers for $5,000 or $6,000 a month, which is extremely affordable. And that's why we've been on the Inc. 5000 the last 3 years. Rapidly growing company. So, Dan, how much money you got for us today? Millions? Billions?
Oh, there's some millions that we'd like to put to work. I just was running some numbers. I dumped it into Chat GPT that at our conference, which I'm going to already plug coming up,
Heck
we
yeah.
have like 15 to 20 billion in capital represented that come to that. So that's real money, but
From all.
all
So
the
tell us more
funds.
about, yeah, tell us more about
Yeah.
the event. You have like all the funds, and that's how much money they have like under management, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I skipped like way ahead there, uh, but yeah, the conference is Kansas City focused, but bringing in folks from around the Midwest, investors from both coasts as well as the Midwest, and so we have about 80 investors come in last year, and the total in those funds committed is quite significant when you include the growth stage funds. And so there, but all spectrum. I mean, there's some that are really tiny, very early stage, others that are growth stage that put a lot of money to work. But
Yeah.
that's why we bring them in, is that they have a great network for investing in early stage companies.
Well, I was talking to a founder today who is trying to buy a company out of bankruptcy and turn it around. It's a long, crazy story for another day. But he was asking me if he should go to this event. So, who is this event for? Like, what kind of founder should consider this event?
Yeah, on the founders side, I would say anybody building tech in the middle of the country is a great candidate for it. And I would put a slight asterisk to say that intends to raise capital at some point. They
Okay.
definitely don't need to be raising capital right now. But if they've raised before, or they're thinking about building their network, anywhere along the spectrum, they would be a good group to have in. We have folks. I would say the largest concentration is B2B tech. There's some that are B2C oriented, some that do some more kind of niche vertical stuff. We're bringing in some healthcare investors this year, enterprise software. So it runs a pretty big spectrum within technology. Traditionally, we said kind of, uh, venture backed or venture ready companies, but you also don't have to be raising venture capital per se. We will have some, royalty based or debt focused funds as well, if
Okay.
that's a fit for your company.
Hey, I always like to go there to hang out with other founders, and there's a cool rooftop bar, and it's good
Yeah.
company, and it's good to get out and meet with other entrepreneurs. So there's a lot of great reasons to go to this event. Um, how many years have you guys been doing this now? Is this like year number 5 or something?
This is your number three,
3.
but
Okay.
I'm sure it seems like five because it's been such a great time. The first year, was kind of coming out of COVID, and the big prompt for putting it on was that we just felt like our community wasn't getting together as much, and we just kind of wanted that for the area. We're not just an investor in Kansas City, but it's home, and we want to be sure that we're kind of helping support the network in our area. So we always knew that there were a lot of investors that wanted to spend more time, but kind of didn't know when to plug in. And so that's why we put it on originally, and it was a really good turnout. People seemed very encouraged, that we would do this and wanted to keep it going. Last year we got really positive feedback again, and so we're going to keep rolling. I think this year I view it as a critical year, building outside the coast, because capital is a little harder to come by right now, and an event like this is where you're going to build your network, and you're going to probably have to have more conversations than you did in the past if you're going to raise capital. So this is a good place to plug in to just start having those conversations and figure out maybe where the market is a little bit too. And I think that kind of getting into that culture and kind of figuring out the pulse of where things are can be really helpful if you're thinking about raising.
Well, as a founder, it's a nightmare to reach out to all these different VC companies, and you don't hear from most of them, and like it's a terrible process. It feels
Yeah.
like online dating. Like you swipe on a lot of people, you get no responses. It feels like the
Yeah.
same. And what's great about this event is you corner them all in one room. They're all there.
Yeah.
You get to shake their hand and stare at them and
Yeah.
why
They
didn't you
can't
get back to
escape.
me? Which is great, which is really, really good. I'm curious though, are there events like this all over the country? Or is this
I'd
a
say there
unique
are
thing that we're doing?
things of a similar flavor. We definitely tried to kind of pick the best format we had seen from going to places like Atlanta or Chicago or Indianapolis. For us, it was all about interaction, like low on panels and people sitting up there talking, and high on, hey, let's just do the high
Getting
substance
them in the
stuff.
room.
Get
Get
them
them
in
in
the
the room.
room. Yeah. Yeah. So, and I'd say like our event, probably more than most, focuses on just, okay, everybody in the room is relevant in some way to being there. So it's not entirely open. You do have to apply to it,
Yeah.
but it's still a decent sized event. But we want to be sure that the investors there are writing checks. They're people we know. We know that they're like good stewards. They're going to be positive in the kind of feedback that they provide, not just extractive. And then we want to be sure that the founders kind of line up generally, kind of somewhat balanced with those investors in this terms of stage and focus and that sort of thing. So that's the work that we put in to make sure that it's highly relevant. And that way, when people do come, they're not afraid to have the conversation. They would feel like, okay, if somebody reaches out to me on the app, there's a good chance I'm going to have a meaningful conversation. They don't need to avoid it or something like that.
Well, it's a great event, and I like the format of it. It's more open. You're getting all the right people in the room. You're inviting people like me, like my company, and others that are in the local community that have a lot of connections, know a lot of people. You're getting all the right people there, which is really good. Really glad that you're doing this, and for those who are listening that are in the area, that you're thinking, hey, maybe this could apply for me. You should definitely check it out. If you're not in the area, there's probably other events like this that you should consider. I like the format of this event. There's a slightly similar event in Kansas City called MidxMidwest. It's in the spring, and it's a totally different format. Like, I think you have to be like one of the 20 companies they pick, and then it's sort of like a dog show and pony thing. Like, everybody presents and everybody just sits there and watches. It's like a totally different event, totally
Yeah.
different format. But that's another kind of format, another kind of event. So,
Yeah.
but huge fan of what you guys are doing. I like your format of it, because it's more like speed dating. You can schedule all of these with the different VCs and different stuff.
Yeah.
Love to talk more about, well, one last thing. So you said people have to apply and get approved. What does it cost them to go?
So yeah, so I'll just say you can go to the website Mid by Midwest. So there's an X for the buy, midxmidwest.com, and fill out an application. So if you're a founder, you apply. It takes like 2 to 4 minutes to fill it out.
Okay.
It's pretty simple. And if you're selected, it's free. So we have
Okay. Even better.
sponsors. Yeah, we've got some great sponsors. One of them might be a guy on this podcast that
Glad to be a sponsor.
yeah, that there's been a big supporter, but we've got some other groups sponsoring, and that allows us in part to make sure that this is, no cost to founders. We
That's amazing.
also, yeah, we also allow investors to apply or corporate innovators to apply as well. But it's free to founders
Okay.
if they get in. Yep.
Okay, awesome. And how many people will get in? It's like a couple hundred, 300, 400.
Yeah, the total event's about 250,
Okay.
and we try to have about 80 or so founders. We're increasing it a little this year. So
Okay.
I think last year we had 70, 75 founders.
All right. My goal is to get every listener there, and you're going to be worried about capacity. So
Yeah, yeah, and
we're gonna.
we've unfortunately had to leave a few on the street the past few years, but it's been a great group, and we're trying to increase it a little bit each year.
Hey, I'm hoping we do more on the rooftop bar because it's cool up there.
Yeah, hope we have good weather.
So pivoting slightly, I think the event's
Yeah,
fantastic, and if anybody's listening, again, you should definitely check it out. Like I said, it's free. If you think about raising money, check it out. MidxMidwest.com. If you live a long ways from here, you live in California, Florida, whatever, you get it. Maybe we're not. Maybe this event's not for you. But I bet there's other events in your area, and see if there's these events are around. And in the spring or in the fall, when did these events happen? These are really cool kind of events to get into the room at one time, be able to talk to 5, 10, 20 different types of investment companies. You mentioned something earlier that I think has become even more prevalent these days. Hearing more about is different kinds of debt financing, and I was
yeah.
curious if you could give me your take on that and what you're seeing specific to that too, and how it relates or compares to the venture side. Hearing more and more about royalty based and debt and all those things.
Yeah, I mean there is starting to be a little bit more spectrum, and I think that's a good thing is to have not just kind of a monolithic form of capital, venture, true venture. That's what we do. We think it fits a certain set of companies really well, but it doesn't fit all of them, and so having more variety, more creativity to the types of capital is only benefits kind of the full spectrum of companies more, and that's something I'm passionate about is seeing that more companies get backed and can go fulfill their objectives. Debt and royalty financing, I would say the last few years, especially as rates were low and things, you saw more things come online, and so a lot of the debt out there tends to fill in for companies that are they're a few million in revenue. So maybe they have some equity backing, or they're at a point where they're not producing cash, so they may not be banked by a traditional bank, but they could be backed by somebody that has a somewhat high interest rate, but they will back them. And the key for that, for those companies, is they're not taking on dilution that comes with equity. Now, it's going to result in some less flexibility usually. I mean, they're going to have to pay that back. And
Yeah.
so may not be able to put every dollar back in the business, but it can help them grow their operation as long as they can grow faster and produce cash faster than they pay back the debt. It can be very additive to the company. Then you have this form of financing like royalty-based financing, which is, I don't want to mischaracterize here. It's kind of like debt, but you're paying it back like as a percentage of the revenue of the company. And there's some different parameters about that of, you pay a maximum percentage of your
Hmm.
revenue up
I
to a
did that.
certain point. You took some of that on. Okay.
Yeah, one of
So,
my companies took a couple $1 million. I think we paid 4% or 4.5% of our revenue, roughly,
okay.
back. Yeah, it worked out good for us. I mean, we struggled to raise VC
Yeah.
funding. I emailed all these guys.
Yeah.
Nobody replied. Dan wouldn't message me back. Everybody says
I
no.
guarantee I got back to you. Yeah.
And we ended up going that route. I think I would have maybe rather had done equity. I think there's pros and cons to both of it, but um, yeah, I think they're both great options. Now, tell us more about how the VC market has changed. Like, what is different about it in 2024? You hear it's harder to invest, but do you guys actually have more money to invest, but being more picky? Like, what is the state of that?
Yeah. It's definitely it's kind of one of those periods where it's been a little bit of a whipsaw of the market. So, leading up to 2021, 2022, there was just super low interest rates. They got even lower during COVID, and that led to tons of capital going out and trying to find something to get more returns on. And so a
Borrowing
ton
money
of
for free,
capital,
basically.
yeah. So basically, that free money got into the market. You got all these commitments to lots of funds, and that happened across the spectrum. Like large institutions were looking to do that. Private individuals were looking to do it. Corporates were looking to do it. So venture capital, if you look at a big graph, I mean, the amount of money in venture was at all-time highs.
Yeah.
And so you also had people sitting at home, and you had investors just scoping out deals all over the world, literally calling on founders or filling their inbox and just trying to put money to work and stuff.
Take my money.
So yeah, so it was a feeding frenzy that, if you had everything lined up right, you raised smartly, you probably did really well out of that. But a lot raised too much capital. Companies were raising it
Invested
too.
at valuations that were too high.
Right. So yeah, and maybe that's something you talk about on your show. There's actually sometimes the worry is, oh, it's too low. I'm giving too much up. But in that part of the cycle, it was companies raised too high, and then they can't keep up with the expectations, and then they have to recap, or they have to cut the company back. They grew, and then they had to cut the company back, and leads to a lot of cultural issues and that kind of thing. So we're kind of working through that now. I'd say like last year was a really tough year in that. Later stage investors that wrote those big checks were pretty much non-existent. I mean, they had still capital in the bank, but they were being very careful of how they were spending it. They didn't want to add new stuff to a portfolio that might have already been struggling. They were looking to just kind of reinforce the companies they'd already invested in and kind of play defense for a while. So you saw like that late stage capital basically come to a standstill, very few deals. You also saw, and to some extent are still seeing, exits, so M&A or IPOs really slow down. And so I think there's some. You've had some stuff going on, so I mean, it's not non-existent, but it's a lot slower market. And when those deals don't happen as readily, if you're a venture-backed company and you're not exiting, your venture fund is not getting cash back or liquidity back, and so the money doesn't recycle as fast through the
Yeah.
system. And so everything is kind of the last couple of years slowed down. There is money out there. There is money that's been very active in a few sectors like AI.
Oh yeah.
But there are also a lot of, I'd say many investors have a higher bar right now for what they're going to want to invest in. And it's the valuations aren't as strong. So we're kind of still in that period. I would say we're starting to come out of it a little bit though. Coming into the second half of this year, we're seeing a little bit more M&A activity. We are seeing deals get done. They're at little different terms than they were before, but there is capital out there. The key is you got to perform. In the zero interest rate world, you didn't really have to perform, you just had to put on a good show. Now you've really got to show that you've got your act together. Not to bring everything back to the event, but one of the things that I think it can help founders do, even if they're not raising right now, is to have a lot of conversations and refine their understanding of what investors are looking for. And as they're building their company, they can start to kind of say, okay, if I'm going to go raise, this is what I need to be doing. This is the bar I need to hit in order to be able to successfully raise. Or maybe venture isn't right, but I've got another instrument that I need to look at or do something different because of what the market is like right now.
So tell us more about Flyover. How much money do you guys have to invest? Like, and what kind of investments do you guys do specifically?
Yes, we have our second fund it's a $60 million fund. So I'll just,
Okay.
that's publicly reported. We invest typically 1 to 2 million initially in a company, and that's a
Okay.
company that's doing something unique with technology, has gotten into the market with some early revenue. So usually sub $1 million revenue, but
Okay.
kind of quick growth into call it 500,000 in revenue. The company's usually raising somewhere between 2 and 5 million in total, and
Okay.
then we will lead a deal, and we typically say that's a seed deal. I mean, that definition varies depending on where you are and things, but we call it a seed deal. We like those companies where they've got those early points of traction and success, but a lot of the story isn't written yet. They're still trying to figure out, exactly how they put together their sales team. They're still, it's usually founder-led sales at the point where we invest, but they've got something really unique, some really deep insight into a problem that we find really interesting. So that's kind of where we play. Our whole reason for being has been, the idea that capital does not really efficiently work its way around the world.
Yeah.
And so if you're not in the Bay Area or New York, it's a lot different within the US. And so the areas where we invest are relatively undercapitalized. The valuations are different. And we've kind of built our firm to be, you know, we're looking to invest in the very best companies in what we call flyover country.
Yeah.
We're not looking to find the very best deal across the world. It's a defined geography where we've built a model where we think we can outperform and really support companies really well, build a great network within a defined space.
You know what's interesting is there's not really any shortage of money in Kansas City. It's just from my experience, none of them know anything about tech, and they're like terrified of it, right? Like that. There's a lot
That's
of money here, a lot
yeah,
of money, but
yeah,
they just don't know anything about tech, and they're like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do about this.
yeah. Folks are conservative. I mean, maybe rightly so. They don't invest in things that they don't know as well. And there is money there. I think there's also sometimes a need for just a little bit more leadership with that money. So people are sometimes willing to follow on to an
Yeah.
investment or provide capital as long as somebody that they feel like knows what they're doing will lead the deal. And that's kind of why we were formed from the beginning as an investor that can and will lead. And we think that that's a critical role because if nobody's leading the deal, it doesn't get done. And we were actually working on a model to do some even earlier stuff because we think that that kind of leadership is needed in the region. When you get to Series A, Series B, if you've got, you're hitting certain metrics and that sort of thing, you do have more of a national market for capital. So when you get a little bit later and the numbers are a little bit more clear, that capital moves a lot more efficiently across the system.
So you mentioned that you're looking for companies that are doing, you say 40, $50,000 a month in revenue,
That's probably a middle point of where we invest. Yeah.
but you called that a seed stage.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for a lot of companies, they think about like, how in the world am I going to get to 40,000 a month in revenue? Like, how do I raise money to get there?
Yeah. It
Right? Like that's the problem for a lot of founders, right?
absolutely. I know it is. It's usually angels that get them there. There's also a class of what's now pre-seed. So
Right.
the funds the definitions kind of migrate their way up over
Just what it
time.
feels like, yeah.
Yeah, but I think that creates for us investors, it kind of creates new opportunity. So that's why I say when I say we're working on something earlier, we're working on something that we'll do more at pre-seed because we feel like risk has moved out of the system a little bit, but that's where the real opportunity is, and so there's need for more capital earlier. But
I'm
those are
with
also the hardest decisions to make as an investor. So that's the trade-off.
I'm with you. The companies that have like no revenue, I'm like, I don't know, I don't really want to get involved with this thing.
It's tough.
Like
I mean, yeah,
it's super hard, and you know, 90 something percent of startups fail, right? But like just getting to like $100,000 a year, $500,000 a year in revenue gets you all of a sudden in sort of like rare territory. I don't, it feels like I both want to say like it's not a very high bar to hit, but it is like also a very high bar to hit both. Like you
yeah,
think about it both ways. Like it doesn't seem like a very high bar, but for most people, it's a really high bar. Like getting to $500,000 a year in revenue for a lot of startups seems like a really impossible task when you're first starting out. Like just
yeah. I mean, it's definitely a mountain at each phase of the business.
yeah,
It's like there was like a Simpsons episode back in the day where they're like dun dun dun. It like shows the mountain peak, and then they turn the other way, and then the next mountain peak is way higher than that mountain peak. And getting that first dollar revenue is tough. Getting that first 100,000, getting the first million is all a real grind. It's not an easy business.
well, Flyover, you guys were one of the first ones to come in. If I remember right, in Kansas City, it was probably what 10 to 15 years ago. Investing this sort of $1 to $2 million check size, right? Like there was not a lot of options in this area back then.
Yeah, yeah. About it's right at a decade, I think, from when we got started. And I'd say the market's definitely evolved some. I think it's become a little more robust ecosystem in the middle of the country. And so it's been fun to be a part of that. When I have some data about our immediate surrounding states, like 240% more capital is invested in venture-backed companies than it was 10 years ago.
Okay, it's good to hear.
But the downside is that it's not that many more companies. It's that more capital goes into the companies that get backed.
Okay.
So we'd love to see that evolve and change. I think also in the current point of the cycle, like we were talking about a moment ago, when capital pulled back, it pulled back even more from the non-traditional markets like what we're in. And so we used to say, okay, 75% of capital goes to basically three states, basically three metro areas within those
Yeah.
states, and that'd be Bay Area, New York, and Boston. Well, over time, that was starting to erode a little bit to where more of the country was getting capital. But then, like, there was a report that came out at the beginning of this year that showed that 80% of capital went to those three states. So there's definitely there's sort of this flight to traditional markets, or some might call it flight to quality. I take a little issue with that, but it kind of reverts back to its norms when it's a more little higher risk part of the cycle. And so we've seen a lot of development in places not just Kansas City, but places like it. And it's been fun to be a part of that ride, but we've got a lot of work to do.
As startup founders in Kansas City and in the Midwest, do you feel like there are a lot more options now for raising capital? Flyover is one of them, but is there a lot more funds, a lot more access and opportunity to raising capital now than there was 10 years ago?
I'd say I think there is. I think just like we bring in a bunch of funds that are interested in investing in the area. I mean, there's more variety. There's been a lot of new fund creation in the last 10 years that it's across the spectrum. There are lots
Hmm.
more like micro funds that are out there with different models and things.
And a
So I
lot
think
of them have probably never had any exits
many of them have
because they're
had
not
no
old enough to
exits.
have even had any exits.
Yeah, the average, I think it was 27 vintage fund has had zero return of capital. And that's a 7-year-old fund now, zero return of capital.
Yeah.
Um, I think there's all this fund creation. There are more options. I think there's a little bit of a resetting happening right now. I think one of the things that we used to see, and hopefully that's changing, is that we'd have founders in Kansas City or other communities, and they were doing some interesting stuff, but then they would only knock on like the local doors, like the three people that are writing checks in the local community, or they talk to a few angels and they weren't finding somebody that would invest. And it's like we try to make network and things for people that just aren't a fit for whatever reason. But the reality is you have to have a broader network to have a likely successful outcome. Is you need to talk to some volume of investors to be able to be successful. I think the good thing in that is if you look at broadly, say the Midwest or the Southeast, there are now dozens of investors in those places that might be a fit for your company, even if your local shop isn't quite the fit for what you're doing. So there is more variety out there. Still not, it's still not like the Bay Area. I mean, there are literally thousands of investors in the Bay Area,
Yeah.
but there's more options now. And one of the kind of functions we serve is being a network. If I see some people send me like a medical device company, and I'm like, I really don't know anything about medical
Yeah.
devices, but I usually have somebody in my network that looks at something like that. So we do a lot of that kind of thing to put people in front of the right.
Well, and I really appreciate the fact that you do that. And I think that's something else that if you're listening to this right now, to always think about, like, you reach out to whatever the VC fund is, and if they say no, ask them who do they know that might be interested in this, because there's a lot of specialty in specific industries, medical device, like, there's funds that are famous that only do like software development tools. That's the only thing they do. And Dan, you may be like, I don't know anything about that. Call them, right? Like, it's it's finding those niches is important too, and that's a great thing that you and others, as I've seen before, help serve in the community, is like steering people the right direction to making those referrals.
Yeah. Yeah, we definitely try to. I mean, I think one thing about our firm and some others that are building in the middle is that we kind of came out of these ecosystems. Like we didn't come at this from like Wall Street. The founders of our firm were founders of tech companies, so there's sort of a passion component there that beyond investing. I mean, we're definitely investors too. I mean, that's number one is we have to return capital, but we try to put people on the right track because we want to see more tech successes.
Well, I really appreciate everything you guys are doing, and you play an important role in the community. I still feel like Kansas City and the Midwest in general is by far one of the best places to be to create and run a business, simply due to the cost of living and the cost of talent. Like, I would never want to be in San Francisco and Seattle and New York and these places. The cost of hiring people is so high. It's, 20, 40, 50% more than Kansas City. And you're competing against all these companies. Like I always told people, like, best case scenario in San Francisco, I hired the people that didn't get a job at Facebook, Microsoft, Google, Twitter, all,
Yeah.
like, name the 100. The best I can do is hire the people that were all rejected from those companies, because trust me, they want to go work for their first. Like, they're not going to come to me first, right? Where in Kansas City, I can be the cool place to work.
Yeah.
I can be the coolest place to work and hire people at a much lower wage and still get really, really good talent. There's absolutely amazing talent here in the Midwest as well.
Yeah. I think there is. I mean, there's great talent everywhere. And it's like the top 1% or the top 5% of talent looks a lot like the top 1 or the top 5% of talent anywhere else. I mean, they're
Yeah.
like the really smart people are really smart. And so and the really good workers are really good workers. And so, some of the like the non-traditional spots, it's not as concentrated, it's not as big, but there's definitely talent there. And you find other characteristics. I mean, there are, elements of work ethic, there are elements of culture, there are other elements of just accessibility. So like you mentioned, being kind of a little bit of one of the few shows in town. Same thing goes with if you have an interesting company in, Kansas City or Indianapolis or, Columbia, Missouri. And you have something that relates to the industries that are there. Usually, they want to help you. They're super
Yeah.
interested in backing you and seeing you be successful. So there's some attributes like that are really nice as well.
Well, even for you guys, are you willing to take a little more risk because it's a Kansas City based company?
That's probably true.
Just a
I'd say
little bit more, just a little bit.
we've gone a little bit earlier
Okay.
when we've done local companies, but it's also because we feel like
Help them a little more.
we can spend time with them. We kind of know who they know a little bit more, so there's a little higher trust factor, and it sometimes just makes it a little easier to do a deal when it's local. So the closer it gets, the easier it is to do sometimes.
Well, at full scale, we work with a lot of startups. We also work with a lot of growth stage companies. We even have publicly traded companies as customers. It's all over the board. Um, helping them hire software developers and even some other talent. We have 300 employees in the Philippines. I'm I'm curious. Do a lot of your companies use offshore and outsourcing? Is that how common is that these days for like the companies that you work with?
Yeah, I'd say it's quite common. I got into this business about 7 years ago, and at that point, it was still like, maybe you kind of had a little bit of a hybrid team, but you really had your core development onshore
Sure,
and mostly in the same office. I think that all changed. It was changing anyway, but with COVID, that was definitely a catalyst, like for a lot of things, where the teams are more distributed, especially with their technology now. I think there is a desire among most venture investors to have, somebody if you're building in the US to have kind of like your leader
I agree.
local.
You should.
You want somebody that's,
You should.
able to design the architecture and the product and give guidance and translate it to the business, but having, a significant offshore operation is not unusual at all.
Yeah.
And in some cases where it's a high trust relationship, like if somebody's worked with somebody on previous projects, sometimes we see completely, like the tech operation is completely offshore. So there's a lot more willingness among the investment community to be flexible on that these
I mean,
days.
I
Yeah.
hear some people, they're like, "Oh, well, our investors want us to have a local CTO and local developers,"
Yeah.
but then at the same time, I'm like, they also probably want you to be smart with your money and get more out of their money.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean,
they
that's
want both.
absolutely the case. And I mean, like, I'm not just, selling your stuff here, but I hear really good things about your people and like how they communicate. And, I think that there's when you can get talent like that, for a very economical price, I mean, it just makes sense.
Well,
What, yeah,
glad to hear you say that.
yeah,
Appreciate that.
yeah. I think one thing that I do see with maybe just to share with brand new founders or like they're just building their business, I still do think it's really important that they find somebody that is part of their team that can, if they're not a technical founder, they need to find somebody that can really help guide the process,
I
even if
agree.
it's figuring out the firm to work with. When you completely outsource and you have no real control or insight into what's being done on the other side of the fence, it's really hard for like an investor to get behind you.
I totally agree.
And it's obvious that you don't really understand what you're
Yep.
building. So that's just a word of caution, is that outsourcing works wonders in a lot of ways, but you still need to find somebody that is a trusted part of the team to help guide that process.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. And that's why I'd recommend all of our clients. The same
Yeah.
thing. It's like having
Yeah.
an in-house CTO leader of some form is always way better. Well, I
Yeah.
really appreciate having you on the show today and give us kind of the state of the union of the venture capital world. Really excited for Mid by Midwest. And again, you're looking for 80. I'm going to call it 180. We're gonna pack this place out.
Come on.
Founders, we're going to get so many people that you're going to be forced in 2025 to double the size of this thing, right?
Hey, I'd love to. So,
So it's a great event. What are the dates of the event again?
so the event is on November 14th.
Okay,
Let me pitch just one other little element of it as
let's
you're
go.
wrapping up here, is to say the core of it is the afternoon of the 14th, which is the one-on-one meetup time, and you can schedule like 15 meetings and get to know people, and then stick around for the happy hour and the rooftop dinner.
Heck yeah.
Sounds like Matt's going to be there.
Yep.
That's super valuable, just peer-to-peer time and networking. This year, we are going to add some stuff in the morning. So if you're in the digital health space, I think we're going to do one on like dual use tech, so like government and private sector, and possibly industrial tech.
Okay.
And then also a like a workshop on growth. So if you more are interested in kind of just business development and growth, so we're having 3 or 4 tracks. There's going to be a little bit of a program you can go to.
Okay.
So that's the morning. Afternoons meetings. The end of the day is social. So stick around for that if you end up coming to the event.
Okay. All right, Dan. Well, thank you so much for doing this. Again, this was Dan Kerr, one of the partners at Flyover Capital. Your guys' website is at flyovercapital.com.
Yes. Yep.
Check them out there if you're looking to raise $1 to $2 million. Seed, Series A, sort of round. So it's great. Thank you so much for doing this today, Dan.
You bet. Thanks, Matt. Great to
All
talk.
right. Thank you.
Bye.